let's get started. I'm really happy to introduce Roland and James from iGraphics. Roland is the Vice President of Global Consulting at iGraphics. He has 25 plus years of consulting experience in the business process and enterprise architecture space with a focus on finance, telco, and defense industries. He shares his experiences freely as a speaker on conferences and webinars, as well as in his podcast, What's Your Baseline? Enterprise Architecture and Business Process Management Demystified. And this is available wherever you can get your podcasts, and I urge you all to join it if you can. James manages the solutions engineer for iGraphics in North America. He has over 20 years of experience in the business process management space, mostly in IT risk management and financial services. James provides input crucial to the iGraphics roadmap product and is responsible for managing proofs of concepts which meet customer businesses' requirements. Gentlemen, let me leave that with you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having us. So, thanks to the audience. I see it's 47 participants, which is great. Thanks for listening to James and I for the first session of the day, which hopefully is very, very interesting for you. And our topic today is process improvement from design to execution, and obviously how process mining fits into that bigger picture. So, but let me start first in what does process improvement actually mean to you? You know, is it process modeling? Is it automation? Is it mining? The reason why we're here? Is it publishing of SOPs and other job aids? Is it showing regulatory and operational compliance? What is it for you, right? And I think this is a question that is just not asked enough, in my opinion. You know, people start initiatives and they don't figure out the whole reason why, because they're interested in the technology. But let's have a look who those people are. Right, so first of all, who is interested in process improvement and obviously also in process mining, right? You see as the first group, obviously the employees, right? They want to be assisted on a daily basis, and their interest is obviously in simplifying processes, right? Why do I do this? Why is it that complicated? Can I improve this stuff? And then the second big group that we see here is executives, managers who are responsible for getting the process done within predefined KPIs. You know, do we meet our service level agreements? Do I have blockers somewhere? Does something fail in my production? And what those guys want is to be alerted. You know, they want to take action, and obviously process mining tools have those capabilities to define thresholds and trigger actions. The third group is the traditional group that's interested in process improvement. Analysts, process improvement groups, all those guys who want to find weaknesses in the processes and want to optimize it to get better. And then maybe a little bit special in this process mining context are obviously developers, because when you think about a lot of process mining technology comes from the realm of RPA or other automation activities, and process mining obviously needs a lot of data to do this, right? So the objective here is to find opportunities for automation and then automate those and monitor them with process mining afterwards. So when we look at process mining, what are the most common use cases that we see? And it's a mix of business and technology here. And let me start in the upper left-hand corner, right? The traditional use case, continuous improvement. I mentioned it before, right? How do I detect and act on issues that I see? How do I identify those opportunities for improvement? How do I make the business case for this, right? Process mining can give you the data, the necessary data for this. The next use case that we see is operational effectiveness, and I mentioned it on the previous slide. You know, become more effective, meet the SLAs, see if your processes are executed as designed. Do I follow my internal policies for this? And speaking of policies, when you go down to the second line on this graphic here, you see obviously all the regulatory requirements that you see here. So process mining can be used for risk and control monitoring. Do my users actually follow the process in the way that we are compliant with the relevant regulations? If we move further on, we see identification of automation potentials, right? And then obviously monitoring the effect of the automation on an end-to-end process. The lowest lane talks about the IT perspective. And here I really like, and it's a little bit forgotten, I really like what SAP did like 15 years ago, where they said, yep, you need to create a business and a technical blueprint before you start implementing. I wholeheartedly agree on this, but the little twist is you should obviously measure first, right? You should go and discover your processes before, and the KPIs, before you redesign it or you automate it, because as we all know, a process that you just automate is still a bad process, right? You need to change the process first to be a better process. And then lastly, after the implementation, you want to know, did my deployment, did my implementation actually achieve what I wanted to achieve, right? Do my users follow the paths that I've designed for them? Can I do the comparison and see if I accomplished what I wanted to accomplish? Well, those 6 use cases are part of a bigger picture. And I'm pretty sure you've seen this in some form or another. But one of the foundations in our software in Process 360 Live is that we want to support the whole process lifecycle. And what you typically see is in the bubble in the middle on top, you see a phase that because I didn't want to use the old term strategy for here, that I labeled high-level design and program roadmap, where you have to have a repository and capture your as-is situation, the what runs, right? So you create your architecture views, your processes, your orgs, your risks, your controls, and so on and so forth, systems, and you do some high-level analysis on this, right? And based on that, you've identified your improvement opportunities. And now the challenge is to put that on a program roadmap, because you need to understand the dependencies between those different things, right? So that you can define transition states. You know, where should that process be in 6, 12, or 18 months? Because I'm pretty sure everyone has seen that you typically do not implement a process within one transition state, you know, because you've figured out there are dependencies. You know, in your improvement process, you say, oh, great, we can get rid of this application and we save X dollars based on that. Unfortunately, that application is also used in 25 other processes, so your business case just falls apart. But if you can map those transition states and say, oh, in a first phase, we do this, in a second, we do this, and then in a third one, because it's parallel projects, then we can get rid of that system. That's obviously a different story. So I like to call that artifact, that repository, the enterprise baseline. And everything comes back to the baseline. So the second phase is then looking at one transition state and create a solution design, you know, the business and technical blueprint that you will have to do. Because now you go into the details. You map out the details of your end-to-end process. You map out how your roles, your organization shall change, how your application landscape changes, how your data model changes, and so on and so forth, right? And at that point in time, you use things like simulation, trying to figure out what is the most optimal future. And your mileage on what good looks like for a process might change. You know, for Brian, it might be the fastest. You know, for James, it might be the cheapest. For me, it might be the one that's the best use of resources. So with simulation, you can figure that out and get a prediction of what will happen with your implementation before you start wrenching. And then obviously, and you see I switched from the design lane here to an execution lane. You then, after that approval, go into the implementation phase. And one thing you notice in implementation is that things typically don't work out as you expected, and your blueprint changes, right? So now you go into the technical details, right? And I put a lot of technical stuff in the call out to the right of the implementation circle, but that also would be true if you just change processes or if you just change the organization. Once you've done your implementation, you actually do hopefully two things. One is you obviously have a party, you got something accomplished, we're all humans. But the other thing is your as implemented becomes the new what runs. So there should be a line between the implementation and the high level design and program roadmap button. Because what you want is you want to provide an updated information basis for the next team that does the analysis for their improvement. And then you run in the process execution phase your process. And that basically goes on forever. But in this execution phase, you also want to make sure that you look at your SLAs. That's typically the most thing. You know, do I produce the right amount of widgets in the right amount of time, in the right amount of quality? And for that, you want to have dashboards that are fed by your runtime systems. The last phase, measure and analyze, is where you basically take a step back. And this is where you see process mining and task mining and all those technologies being in there, because you want to do a detailed analysis of what's going on with your process. You want to know, do my users do what they're supposed to do? I mentioned that a couple of times. Do I recognize patterns in the behavior of people? Do I see variations? What are my actual KPIs? You know, because there's obviously a difference between what a SME might tell you and what the system has recorded in their data. And the main objective of that last phase, the measure and analyze phase, is obviously to trigger the next iteration of this circle, right? So when I look at what a good tool should do, is it will help you in all phases of the life cycle, right? So when you look at the design phases in the upper right-hand corner, you see things like bringing in reference content. If you don't know how your processes look like or where you get started, well, maybe it's a good idea to align to those, because they're typically also shipped with KPIs. You know, you use analysis and simulation functionality on your as is to see how to improve it and how to get to a better to be. And when you think about your implementations, you want to have technical interfaces to synchronize your processes with implementation tools, right? So that you can manage the scope and manage changes. And then on the left-hand side, you see all the monitoring things, dashboards, mining, task mining, all those things that will help you get a grip on what's currently running and also help you analyze the reality in your systems. When you have to put it on a timeline, and our deep belief is that we make every process a living, breathing process, not just a process model in a repository or on a virtual piece of paper that ends up on a shelf and it's collecting dust, right? But our objective is, with our Process 360 Live platform, is to have those living, breathing processes that have all those operational information in there so that people use them. And they're not just used for the blueprinting phase. But it needs 8 steps to do this, right? The first 2 steps is obviously discovering your processes, your as is. And you can do this either in the traditional way, using subject matter experts and bring them in a room or virtually in a room, and work with them on process models and get an understanding of what the happy path is, what exceptions are, and all that stuff. Or you use process mining in step 2 to discover your processes with the data that you get from your runtime systems. Once you have this, you look at your as is and you've identified where you want to be, you obviously can then use a repository and collaboratively design future state processes, right? By transferring your discovered as is processes into our design tool. Once you have this, you use the simulation functionality that I mentioned before in step 4. This is a vastly undervalued feature that a lot of clients I've worked with don't get their arms around. and they just say, why should I do this? Let's hop to the next step, right? But it's a cheap way to see, oh, what would be the outcome before you start wrenching. Once you got that approval, you look into the automate phase. So you push your process model into your automation tool. You do the necessary form design, rules setup, and whatever you have to do to orchestrate the process. And then you run it, right? And this brings us to the last three phases on this slide, right? The first thing is you want to make sure that you complied with your company or regulatory requirements, right? So you want to make sure, like I said before, do I produce the right amount of widgets in the right amount of time, in the right amount of quality, following those regulations, following those requirements that you have to comply to. But then obviously you also want to optimize your process, as you can see in step 7, right? So you want to make sure that when you see something that goes south, that you have a technical means to go and interact with your current process, right? To go and change things. And then last but not least, one thing that I think we're special in here is we have a prediction capability in our mining tool, right? So you can predict the future using AI, and you can see, oh, those cases are in risk for going south. You know, there might be the bottlenecks coming ahead, there might be delays or other things that you don't want. And you obviously can alert on those as well, so that you have enough lead time to take measures that avoid that unwanted situation. Well, the big question that comes is obviously, how do I get started with this? How do I align my processes? And as you can see, my answer is not just do process mining, right? I think that falls short when I look at our competition for this. I think you have to do a little bit more, right? And it needs to be organized. And those 5 things that you see on that slide help you with that. So one is you need a tool that helps you access, organize, and manage thousands of your processes, right? One mistake that I see organizations do is they just focus on one process and they don't understand the dependencies, right? Based on that, you can use that repository obviously as a single source of truth, right? You can use it to add additional documentation, but you can also use it to create documents like a process narrative or an SOP. Also, and I think by now it became clear when you think about the 5 steps in the process lifecycle, you want to have your activities being aligned to your strategy. And that means you need to understand which capabilities you need to understand the key performance indicators and so on. And then last but not least, you want to have a 360-degree insight in all those things and use process mining as a key part of this to analyze, predict, and do other things with this technology. So long story short, when I look at our Process 360 Live set, we cover those 3 areas. And I think that makes our offer, and that's a shameless pitch, obviously, that makes our offer standing out from that of the competition, because we're not a one-trick pony, because we're not just thinking and focusing on one type of technology. We build a platform that supports the full process lifecycle. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to James, who will just show you how things look in our Process 360 Live tool stack with an example.
Thank you, Roland. Let me go ahead and start sharing my screen. Okay, so within iGraphics, you can set up customized dashboards that allow different segments of the population to focus their attention on what's relevant to them and their role. And in this example, we have someone who's responsible for continuous improvement of a specific process. And here's that personal loan processing process. You'll see that this is being monitored through the lens of a customer journey, the different moments in that journey, so that you can see from a customer experience perspective how the process is performing. Now, after analysis the key performance indicators can be extracted, and you can use process mining to monitor your process so that you can understand, for example, what the average cycle time is and the average cycle times for those specific moments that are important in that value chain. Now, there's a couple of other metrics that can be monitored, but in this example, we have someone who's monitoring this and sees that the average cycle time is performing very poorly and has been performing very poorly for some time. And so in order to be able to understand a little bit more exactly what's going on with this process, this specific user would be able to hone in on a specific moment in the process and see the 3 areas that are most important: qualifying the loan, reviewing the qualified loan, and providing funds for the loan. And you can see that there are moments that are, one is in green, one is in yellow, one's in red status. If you want to go a little bit further and look at the entire process, we'll go ahead and expand this a little bit more. You'd be able to see all of the different areas, and you can also see some additional information. So if this user needed to talk to someone to understand exactly what's going on with the process more at the ground level, they would be able to do so by contacting the different roles that are involved. You can see in the metadata here, you can see what the incoming work products and outgoing work products are, requirements that are governing this, and so forth. And again, all of those key performance indicators that were mentioned before. So if the decision is to review what has been mined for this specific process, they would be able to go to mining and see what has been happening over time. You can see we have an average of 17 new cases per day, 91 unique events per day. And we can see that that average case duration is over 2 weeks, which is, again, very poor. We also have a pretty poor efficiency rate of 57.4%. So there are a lot of transactions that are getting held up and are being held up in bottlenecks. And of course, we have a lot of different variants that have been shown here. So let's go ahead and look at the detail. We can go here to look at the event map. And right now it's being focused on the activities that are most common. So what we're going to do is go here and expand this out to show all of the specific activities. And we're also going to see all of the links between the activities. Now, when analyzing this, we might want to go ahead and run an actual animation of this. So we'll go ahead and take the animation and start running this. And let's go ahead and speed it up a little bit. And what happens is you can see that the transactions are flowing through the process fairly quickly, but then they're getting bogged down here toward the end of this specific area where it's take control action, perform case review. And so this is taking a long time. And we're trying to see what exactly is going on here. So in order to do that, all we have to do is go back to that process map and see exactly where that is. So that we find is in that review and qualify section. We can see that the process is getting checked, or I should say the customer is being checked. They're checking an exclusion list. So this is making sure that they know your customer regulation is being followed to make sure they're not on any exclusion lists like terrorist watch lists and things of that nature. If they are, then they're going to check the conditions. They'll also perform a politically exposed person screening and an SNE screening. And you can see that if there are some hits, then it's going to go to that case review and take control action area. So we've already identified with process mining that this is the most costly area, the one that's taking the longest. Now, after some analysis, it's determined that actually when a hit is noticed and it does go down into the perform case review and take control action area, that should be taking some time because we do want the users who are reviewing this to be able to do a thorough review to make sure that we're following this regulation. But we also find out during the mining of this that there is some false positives that are happening. So we can see that when the check exclusion list is happening, sometimes the users who are reviewing this in the core banking system and using the KYC tool and the KYC risk module that you can see here, sometimes they're flagging something as on the exclusion list when it really isn't. The same thing is happening here, perform S&E screening and perform PEP screening. And the result is that this information is causing transactions to go down into that longest path of the process that really didn't need to be there. And so the hypothesis that has formed is that if we can reduce the amount of false positives here in these 3 steps, the check exclusion list step, perform S&E screening step, and perform PEP screening step, even though these steps down here are not going to happen any faster, we're going to reduce the amount of transactions that are flowing down this path that don't need to go down that path. And that way you can speed up the process and make it more efficient. So by going in and simulating this information, you can then determine that if you're able to make a specific reduction in those false positives, you want to be able to see exactly what's going to happen. So you can simulate that using our simulator, and you can assume that you're going to have a 30% reduction in the check exclusion list, perform S&E screening, and perform PEP screening by applying some automation. And so in order to do that, you would just go in and be able to go ahead and remind that process after you're able to automate that. So let's go ahead and show that automation really quickly. And we can see that we're able to go in and begin to look at the different processes that are going to be, or activities that are going to be going through here. And you can go ahead and say that you're going to want to go ahead and start a new onboarding. And you can see here that it's asking for you to add some additional information. So in this case, we're going to add a passport, we're going to add a driver's license, utility bill, social security number, and this user is going to be able to go ahead and add their email. And then you can send this, and this is a conversational AI automation that we have. And this allows you to be able to go in and use a conversation as the basis for being able to ensure that this specific process is being managed, is going through the workflow in such a way that allows a user to really easily process this without having to learn how to code forms or use the forms even, since everyone knows how to use a chat technology. So it's saying here, go ahead and review this information. And you can go ahead and look at this information a little more closely, the information that was uploaded in the passport, the supporting documents. And then once you've done that, you can then say, the automation is going to ask, is there anything you'd like to correct or change before we run the background check? You can say no. And then what's going to end up happening now is it's going to connect with our core banking system that's going to be running these background checks. And again, this is happening all on the back end. Once this is done, what it'll do is it will then come back with his credit score. And then it says that Krista's AI recommends to request more information. Well, why? Well, in this case, the customer, the issuing country of their passport is actually different from their place of birth. And it is recognized that when that happens, when that pattern occurs, then what ends up happening is the user is going to, or I should say the customer typically needs a more deep background check. So it's recommending that. So how would you like to proceed? So what we're going to do is we're going to request more information. And then you can see that in order to do so, you can go ahead and contact the information, contact the customer, get additional information for them. And then once you're able to do that, you can then add your confirmation background check number. You're going to say that this was passed. We can approve this. And now you can see, okay, this customer is approved and it is on board. And so by going ahead and quickly using our automation platform to be able to automate this portion of the process, then you're able to go ahead, put that into practice, and then remind the process to see exactly what happens after it's remined. So you go through, you can now look at the process this time. And then when you go through, you're going to see that the actual paths have changed a little bit. When we run an animation on this one, we can see that the transactions are running through much more quickly. And you can also see that where it was 2 weeks, it's now taking 2 days to go through the process. And so by going in and remonitoring this in the case of our dashboards, this information can come in, and then you can see this information right here where you see a dramatic reduction in the cycle time. And of course, not all of the moments in that journey. So provide funds for loan is still in red status. There's still some areas of improvement, but again, you can see how you can use a combination of mining, a combination of that along with the design of your process and automation in order to improve the process over time and have all of the metrics needed to make a really decision-based, or I should say a fact-based decision, so that when you're improving the process, you're able to test out your theories and then actually see if what you had planned on implementing, if the outcome was what you expected it to be. Let me go ahead and turn this back over to Roland.
Yeah, thank you, James. And Brian, if you could make me presenter again, thank you. And let me show my screen again. So thank you for James for this excellent demonstration. And I hope it became clear that to improve your processes, you need all the different capabilities that you see in a modern process management tool. You need the mining capability to figure out what to do and where to improve. You need the repository to see the process, and then being able to create an updated process, if you will, and simulate it. And then you need an automation tool, just like our Krista software that uses AI and conversational UI to interact with you and then actually speed up the process. Obviously, the big question now is, well, where do you go when you want to learn more? And thank you, Brian, for mentioning it in the introduction. Obviously, we do have a podcast. It's called What's Your Baseline? You find it at what'syourbaseline.com/podcast. And you can find it on all the major platforms like Spotify and Apple and Amazon and Google and all those things. We're inviting you to join us in our conversations. Process mining is obviously a big topic in there, but the focus is more around how do I improve processes? How do I build architectures in that bigger picture that I just described? And obviously, if you want to reach out to either James or I, on this slide, you also see our email addresses. Please feel free, if you have any questions on this, to reach out to either of us, or go to igraphics.com and learn more about our Process 360 Live platform and how it can help you transform your processes into your advantage. And with that, Brian, back to you.
Roland, thank you very much indeed. Thank you both for a fantastic presentation. And I urge everyone online at the moment, please use this opportunity to get those questions answered that you are desperate to get some feedback on. So I have a comment first of all, and I think we'll start here because I understand the underlying question, and I suspect that both of you get asked this a lot. So Russ from San Jose has commented, many times with analysis, he sees the wrong things being measured. Now that's his comment. I suspect his question is more around how can he ensure that the right things are measured, or what should he be talking to his people around about ensuring that the analysis throws out the right data and gives them the right way of moving forward. You probably see this a lot.
Yeah, so let me take that question. You've seen that on that one slide where I said, well, what does it take to get started with process improvement, right? I think what you need to do in this case is to be able to align your processes to your strategy, because that will determine who do you want to be when you grow up, right? So how do you intend to run your processes? What are the KPIs that you want to measure? And I mentioned it a couple of times. Your mileage might vary, Brian, you might want to have the cheapest process. I might want to have the fastest process. And James might want to have the best resource utilization, or whatever good looks like. So that is one of the things that you would need to define for your organization. And that basically goes with the alignment to your strategy, which you obviously can model in our tool as well.
And if I might add, sometimes the word key and key performance indicators are overlooked in that there's so many different metrics that you can measure, and you are really focusing on really too many of them. So really trying to figure out what is that key performance indicator, or those key performance indicators, typically not going to be all that many that are really going to move the needle to improve that process.
Yeah, and if you really are lost or get started with that exercise, there's, and I mentioned it as well, there are reference frameworks out there. One thing you might want to look at when you're at the beginning of your journey is to look, for example, at the APQC, the American Productivity and Quality Council process classification framework, because it not only gives you a breakdown of processes that an organization might have, either generic or industry specific, but it also ships with KPI definitions. What is the thing that most organizations measure as operational KPIs for this process?
Thank you both for that. Russ, I note that you've commented that you like their answers. In fact, commenting, yes, correct, some KPIs can be deceptive, and obviously adding a good point. So Russ, if you want to continue the conversation with either Roland or James, please don't hesitate to reach out. Now, moving on slightly, and as I say, I'm sure this is something that you get asked a lot, but when they're looking at the sort of complete process life cycle, how should someone get started with that process in terms of managing the whole life cycle process?
Yeah, I think that's hard, right? Because what you see is you see a lot of good intentions, and you see then, unfortunately, a lot of failed efforts of doing this. So I think the first recommendation that I would have is try to find a sponsor for that initiative in your organization, high enough in the hierarchy of your organization to have enough influence on that, because the best intentions die if leadership doesn't buy into this. The second thing that you want to do is, and that obviously is also an argument to convince that candidate for sponsor that you've identified, is to look at the objectives and define the strategy for that initiative. Why do I do this? How do I do this? How do I measure success? And all these things, what will I do to improve the organization, and how does this initiative fit into that bigger picture? And then lastly, you might want to, and only at that point in time, you might want to look at defining your tool stack, right? Which tools do I need? And what features do I need? What capabilities do I need? And once you have that and have it implemented, one tip that I would give is have a look at the maturity. There's maturity assessments, maturity models out there for process management that you want to look at to say, okay, what does good look like? Where am I on that scale from, whatever, a CMMI scale from 1 to 5? 1 being the individual hero that does rescue the day, right? That might be the trigger why you want to have that initiative, to a level 3 where everything is organized on an enterprise level and defined, to a level 5 where everything runs with feedback loops, fully automated, like a well-oiled machine. That would be my recommendation. And obviously the last thing that I would have a look at is, before you start with this, try to figure out your catalog of processes that you have, right? Because one thing you will notice is you will have hundreds of those, and you can't start with all of them at the same point in time. So you have to make some decisions to say, hey, we're going to start with this because it's urgent, or it's important, or this is where we see the most difficulties. And that, to close the loop, might come back to the selection of your sponsor.
Fantastic, Roland. Thank you for that. Which segues very nicely into the next question. Maturity. Do you actually need to have all your processes documented before you can do process mining? A very simple question, but something that when I'm speaking to people gets asked a lot.
James, you want to take it, or should I?
I can take that. You know, you don't need to have all of your processes, you know, documented before you begin, but you do need to have an initial understanding of how the processes in the scope look like, because that allows you to identify the actual systems that you need to get the data. So, you know, a common misconception is you can just go ahead and just mine the data, but you really do need to have the information documented in some way, and it doesn't have to be a very detailed analysis. But if you have the general steps, the general framework, then you know what systems you need to look at in order to obtain the log files that you need in order to be able to do a process mining project. It's also going to help in determining conformance. So once you have the process mined, having that information will allow you to be able to see if your process design is really conforming to how the process is executed. So, you know, you don't really have to have everything, but you do need to have a general framework. That conformance checking aspect of that is going to be really important when, you know, when those who are monitoring the process for process performance can see whether or not that process is conforming to design. It could be those who are obviously included in process improvement efforts and also internal auditors.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that, James. So Anna, who is a Brazilian healthcare process consulting person, has a very specific question. She would like to know the main challenges that you see in the context of healthcare for applying process mining. Anna sees, and her colleagues in this space see a hard journey to obtain good data to apply data analysis. Any experience or assistance that you can provide to Anna in this context?
Yeah, I can. As you can hear at my accent, I'm coming from a land where digitalization is still a very hard thing to do. And it is the same thing, you know, get the right data, identify the systems. Typically what I see in healthcare, it's not standardized systems, you know, it's different than if you would look at whatever procure to pay process that has an ERP system behind it, but it's custom solutions that you have. So you need to have a good understanding of your process. You need to figure out how do I get data out of those systems. And typically they also need to be aggregated, right? Because they're measuring things on a very low level, which is obviously then also a challenge because you just have an immense amount of volume that you would have to bring up with. The other thing that we also want to keep in mind, and that's a little bit of a stretch, healthcare is obviously, together with pharma, heavily regulated industry. So you also need to have to make sure that you keep all those privacy regulations and all those type of things in mind, which also might have an impact on your process mining activities and the process mining results.
Thank you, Roland. Anna, I hope that gave you some insight. I'm sure you can follow up afterwards with Roland. Be delighted to continue that conversation with you. Moving on, if I may, to one question which has come up. And again, I'm sure that this is something that you'll be quite happy to look about. But how does Process 360 Live differ from other BPM and mining platforms on the market? I know it's a very specific and it puts you a bit on the spot, but what are the main differences that you would see by comparison to the rest of the market?
So I'll take this one. Roland, in his presentation earlier, said that the Process 360 Live platform isn't a one-trick pony, right? Rather than us focusing on one specific area of that circle of improvement, we offer a complete solution. It offers, first of all, a single source of truth for all your organizational processes, and that helps you to facilitate better design because it gets more people involved in collaborating and understanding the processes that are being executed in an organization and that need to be improved. It also allows for analysis of current states and process monitoring by using process mining, as we've discussed. And that monitoring of your processes using mining is going to allow you to make sure that you are aware of problem areas in your processes so that you can ensure that optimization is happening on a continuous basis. Our process mining capability, as Roland mentioned, also has a predictive analysis component. So the more transactions that are running through our process mining system, the system itself will be able to determine trends and be able to tell you, for example, where a specific transaction is likely to take too long, and that'll allow you to get ahead of the curve and fix problems before they happen, as there's an alerting component that can alert users that something might happen that you don't want to happen. And then finally, we also have a simulation capability, so that in the event you have a hypothesis, you have some ideas as to how a specific process might be improved, rather than take the costly steps of implementing it and then finding out that your idea wasn't a good one, right? You can actually test out those theories virtually and test out various scenarios so that you can pick out which is the best one to implement based upon the information that the simulator has given you. And so, you know, we consider ourselves to be a complete solution from design to monitoring to process mining to simulation. And of course, all of this can also be used when automating your processes once you've optimized them.
James, thank you for that. And as a follow-up to that, Ben asked the question here. I suspect there's obviously some pain behind this question, but how simple is it to implement?
Well,
simple.
Yeah, it depends on a you know, depends. I hate to say it depends. Yes, it does depend.
Good.
But you know, standing up the software is very easy. We're hosted in Microsoft Azure. You know, you can stand up an instance in a day, right? So depending upon which components you're implementing, because not all of our customers are implementing all of them at the same time, and how much consulting you need, it can take as little as a week or several weeks. You know, because it might just be a question of our professional services organization, which Roland leads, to delivering training, or it could be a little more broader, where you're doing training of the system, but also best practices and things of that nature. But with that said, we have a self-serve online university that helps with this. And we also have walk me guides that are embedded in the tool that can teach users on how to draw a diagram and other concepts that are offered by our software.
So now James spills the beans a little bit prematurely, because we officially opened shop for our iGraphics University on April 12th. But for those of you who are interested in having a look at it and can live with a mess that we're having just days before the go live, go to university.igraphics.com and have a look what we currently have there. And this obviously, that offer will grow over the course of the year with more courses.
Fantastic. Guys, an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for this. Wherever you're listening and coming from, if your question was not answered today, or you would like to follow up with either Roland or James or both, or anyone else within the iGraphics team, please reach out to them as shown on screen. And also do check out the university. It sounds as if you're getting an initial glimpse, but to the chaos behind the scene. And we have one final question that has just come in from Shelley. So Shelley, you've just kind of got in there at the last minute. And literally, guys, if you could answer this as quickly as possible and follow up with Shelley afterwards mainly. Shelley asks, how do you document parts of the process that are not done electronically, but manually?
Yeah, the quick answer is two ways. As you've seen on the step slide, you can obviously do this in workshops with your SMEs, right, and capture that the traditional way. But we also work with partners for task mining. So in this case, if you have a process where you don't have event logs and you want to have a manual step being included, you would use task mining for this. And then the output of task mining becomes just another source that you put into your process mining.
Thank you very much for that, Roland. James, anything to add?
Well,
Thank you very much for having us.
Seeing you at iGraphics University, and obviously, if you have any questions, you see our email addresses. Please don't be shy. Reach out, listen to the podcast, learn about our tools, and we're happy to have been here.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, as I've said, and please do reach out to them to continue the conversation afterwards. You've got their contact details below. Thank you very much, guys. Enjoy the rest of your day.
You too.
Thank you.
Bye. So, ladies and gentlemen, we now take a break, which is about 15 minutes before we have our next presenter join us for their session. That is Ed Cook from the University of Richmond. He is the president of the Change Decision LLC part of that business, and he will be walking us through a number of interesting things which I think will be quite useful to you. So we will see you back here in 15 minutes at the top of the hour. Thank you so much for your involvement in the first one. Looking forward to catching up with you and Ed in about 15 minutes. Take care.